Amen. Let's take our Bible this morning and let's go. I want to begin in the Old Testament. Don't have a heart attack. Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, I want to start with chapter 3, I think, this morning. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It's been a long time since we were over there. Wisest man, attributed to the wisest man that ever lived. I don't know if it's so or not, but they say it's so. I've probably pondered more on this message, thought more about it, redone it more times than any message that I can probably remember in recent days or weeks or months. My challenge this morning really is to give you all the information that you need to feel secure and challenged, but at the same time not give you so much that you feel confused or have a lot of doubts. I just want to really talk to you this morning. I hope that what I have to say today is going to take root in thousands of people that are around the world. I'm talking to people on live stream as well as those that are you here this morning. Those of you that are on live stream, I consider you as much as a member. Those of you that are regular live stream viewers, you contribute to the church, and we appreciate it. What I have to say this morning is to you as well as to the house here at Grace Point Community Church. Like I say, I've pondered about this. I've thought about it, redone it. I laid low most of the week just to try to get the mind of the Lord on how to present what I want to say this morning. So we're going to begin in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I want to read the first 8 verses. They're very familiar verses. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1 says, "To everything there is a season. There's a time and a purpose for everything that is under heaven." You know, a season, that's kind of Bible talk. We really don't talk about seasons. But a season is a period of time that has a definite beginning and a definite end. And in between that beginning and that end, we call that a season. And so Solomon said that everything has a season. He goes on from verses 2 through 8 and tells us everything that has a season. But in verse 1, he clears it up. He says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." Every purpose that is under heaven has a season, a start and an end. In verse 2, he says there's a time to be born and there's a time to die. There's a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep, verse 4 says, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain and a time to lose. A time to keep. These are all contrasts. A time to keep and a time to throw away. Verse 7, a time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. There's a time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and there is a time of peace. This morning I want to talk to you about change. Everything in these verses that we read from these first 8 verses of the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, everything in those verses tells us that everything is subject to change. In fact, everything sooner or later does change. Isn't that true? Someone said, and I don't know who said it, but it's really true. Someone said that the only thing for sure in life is change. The only thing for sure is change. You can just bank on it. Whenever God is, as we say in Texas, is fixing to bring change, He moves seasons. He ends one season, starts another season. He ends one period of time and starts another period of time. And every time that God moves seasons, He's prepared a people that are willing. He's already prepared them, and they are willing and they're prepared to make a change. And often the change that comes is a very drastic change, a drastic transformation. And the change and the transformation that takes place a lot of times has a ripple effect that will create change not only in other people, but will also change the very fabric of culture itself. You know, just in our lifetime, we have come through changes that have changed our world, that have changed our culture. I personally believe, frankly, that there's a huge spiritual shift that is taking place in the earth today. I think there's a tremendous spiritual transformation that is going on. I think we're coming to the end of one season spiritually in the world, and we're coming into another season spiritually. And that shift is going to be facilitated by what I would call agents of change. I believe that we're a part of that ushering in of that change. We're not the full, the full thing. We're not the full cultural change that is taking place. But I believe that God has prepared us in this house, in this church, to be part of that change and to be agents of change. Now that means if we're going to make changes and we're going to be part of what God is doing today and part of the shift of our culture, that means and is going to require that there be some shifts and transitions. And that we align ourselves, now listen very carefully, that we align ourselves with what the Father through the Son and the Spirit is doing today. I think it was Henry Blackaby in his church, in his book titled Church Leadership. In that book, Henry Blackaby said that the greatest purpose in life is to find out what God is doing and then join it. Find out what God is doing and then become part of it. So what I'm here this morning partly to tell you is that I'm not trying to make anything happen, but I am here to be part of what is happening. And I really want our church to be part of what is happening. We're not trying to make something new or come up and form something that isn't already formed. What we're doing is joining ourselves to what God is already doing. So before I talk about us this morning, I want to show you in maybe 10, 15 minutes, no more than that, I want to show you, not in depth, but I want to show you 4 easy to understand changes and change agents in the Bible. And I want you to put yourself in the place of these people that underwent dramatic shifts and changes in their life that were big enough that it changed the world in which they lived. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through 4 passages of Scripture this morning. I want you to put yourself in the place of these people that are undergoing change, because unless I miss my guess, you sense, as I sense, that there is a lot going on in the world today. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of change naturally, but what I'm most concerned about is the changes that are going on spiritually. And there is a lot taking place. Let's just look at a couple of different examples in the Bible. Let's start back in Genesis chapter 12. And let's look at the life of Abraham for just a minute. Genesis chapter 12. And let me read the first 4 verses out of Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. Let's look at just some real quick, and then I'm going to bring it right home into us here at Grace Point. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1 says, "Now the Lord said to Abram," Genesis 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country and get away from your family and from your father's house. And I want you to go to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation." Now we all know that at this point in time, God said He was going to make him a great nation, but he had absolutely 0 children. You think God's setting him up for a change? He said, "I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I'll bless those that bless you. I'll curse those that curse you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram, now watch this, was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Now I want you to put yourself in the place of Abram. Abram was going to birth a race of people. And God knew what He was doing. Up to this point, he had no children. And the guy is 75 years old. Evidently, if you read very much about Abram, he was a well-to-do guy. The guy had money. He was rich. Right? He was secure in his living. He wasn't looking where his next dollar was coming from. 75, he was bring it to today. He was probably living a really good life of retirement. right? So God speaks to him, and game on. Change was underway. And the change that came to Abraham disrupted everything that he had grown secure in. I mean, it is easy to become very secure in everything. You just get into the groove of life, you live life the way that it is, you become secure, and all of a sudden, God begins to do something and he starts to affect the change in your life. What I want you to see out of this story of Abraham is that God's change is not controlled by our security. No matter how secure you are this morning, God can bring a life-changing, cultural rattling change into your existence. All right, let's come over one more book to Exodus. Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. And let me start with verse 1. I'll just read verse 1 and 2 and then 7 to 10. Verse 1 says, "And now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the backside of the desert, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God." Verse 2, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed." Verse 7, "And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrow. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up from the land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites." And I bet about that time Moses was getting uptight. He says, "Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them." In verse 10 he says, "Come now therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." You think he's in for change? Now let me tell you about Moses. Moses at this time was 80 years old. First 40 years he lived in Pharaoh's court. Second 40 years he lived on the backside of the desert. He's about 80 years old, and God approaches him and says, "I want you to go into the land and deliver my people from bondage." He's 80 years old. Not only that, he has a real physical difficulty. He is a stutterer. He stutters. He's not very good of speech. And God takes him and sends him. A man that has been working 40 years in the family business. Isn't that what it says in verse 1? He'd been tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He's watching his father-in-law's sheep. He's in the family business. He's taking care of the sheep. So he's been doing this about 40 years. Now, let's look back at the early part of the life of Moses. If you remember back in Moses' early life, when he was raised in Pharaoh's court, there was a time he went out and he knew that he was not an Egyptian. He knew that he was actually one of the Israelites. And he saw an Egyptian taskmaster abusing one of the children of Israel, and he interceded and he killed the Egyptian soldier. Remember that story? And so what happened was he became a wanted man, and he fled the country when he was 40 years old. He went into hiding for 40 years. So he had a heart for God. What I'm trying to say is he had a heart for God. He had a heart for the people when he was younger. But do you know how life is sometimes? You get a vision, you get a dream, you get a desire, but there's just a way that life has of eroding it away, and you just kind of set it on the back shelf. And you just get busy living life, working a job, raising your family, going about whatever you do to live life, and you more or less forget about it. Let me tell you, God didn't forget. He didn't forget that he had put that in Moses' heart. And so he revived Moses. And Moses went from an unknown sheep herder in the desert to the most visible man in all of Egypt. He went from where nobody knew him to being the deliverer of an entire nation. Abraham birthed the nation, but it was Moses that led the nation to go into the promised land. So God effected great change through Moses to bring the children out of slavery and to deliver them and get them to head toward the promised land. All right, let's look at a third one. Let's go to Acts chapter 2. This affects a group of people. Acts chapter 2. We'll pick it up with verse 1. Acts chapter 2 and verse 1. What I want you to see this morning is when God gets ready to change, He has prepared a people to be the agents of that change. They have been finely tuned to be the ones that can bring the change into the earth. Whenever God gets ready to move, it's suddenly to us, but it's a long preparation period for God. Acts chapter 2. It says, and when the day of Pentecost had fully come, I'll read down through verse 4. When the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind. It filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire, and one sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Down to verse 14. Peter, standing up with the 11, raised his voice and said to them, men of Judea and all that dwell in Jerusalem. Now what had happened? They all rushed out of the upper room. They went down into the city. They began to proclaim the gospel. And Peter finally, in verse 14, stands up and says to them all, men of Judea and all who are in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and heed my words, for these are not drunk as you suppose, since it is about the third hour of the day. But this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. Here's the change. It shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out of my Spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall see dreams. So what do we find here? We find that this 120 that came out of the upper room were actually part of a larger group that saw the resurrected Jesus. The Bible says there were actually over 500 people that saw the resurrected Lord. Now, what has always baffled me is why only 120 out of the 500 made it back to the upper room. You would think if somebody saw the resurrected Jesus, they would have been motivated to see this thing through further, wouldn't you? But out of the 500 that saw the resurrected Jesus, less than 25% made it back to the upper room. But the 120 that made it back to the upper room were those that God had prepared to effect great change in the earth. The 120 were agents of change. And when they came out of the upper room and they began to spread the gospel, they had absolutely no idea of the adventure and the ride they were in for. They didn't know that many of them would be martyred and many of them would be killed. And what I pull out of that is that spiritual opposition does not stop God's change. Yeah, they were opposed. They were in a great persecution. Many died, many were martyred, but that did not stop the change of God. But those 120 changed the landscape of the spiritual world against great odds. All right, let's come over to Acts chapter 9. Let me just show you one last one. Acts chapter 9, verse 1. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if any be found who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone round about him from heaven, and he fell to the ground, and he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul said, who are you, Lord? Then the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? The Lord said to him, arise, go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Verse 7, and the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice but seeing no one. Then Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no one, but they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus, and he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. All right, here's a guy that was well established in religion. He was a religious zealot, well educated. He had all of the answers. He was out doing God's work. He thought he was doing God's work, persecuting the church. You know, he was going from town to town. He was ridding the world of this pesky, heretical cult called the Way. And what I pull out of this is that being hip deep in tradition and legalism and religion doesn't stop God's change. When God gets ready to pull a change and He wants to pull you out of religion and legalism and religion, He will do it. And this guy that went from Saul to Paul ended up turning the world upside down. You and I both know he wrote most of the post-resurrection scripture and brought great change to the people of God. Now, in all four of these instances, there are three things that were in common when all of these changes took place. Whether it was Abraham, Moses, the day of Pentecost, or Saul to Paul, there are three things that I see there in common. First of all, they had no idea how to pull off what they were asked to do. Every change that they were asked to oversee or to bring into effect was beyond their natural ability. They did not have a well-constructed, organized plan from A to Z on how to do it. Second of all, none of them were looking for drastic change, but change found them. That's big. Most of the time, we don't look for change, but change finds us. And number three, it took place suddenly to them, but it wasn't a suddenly to God. It was a well-prepared, long thought out, finely tuned, executed plan that He instituted. So they didn't know how to do it. They weren't looking for change. And the third thing was, it was suddenly to them, but God knew what He was doing. God planned it out. All right, now let me just talk about us for a few minutes. Let me talk about us, because we are in a season of change. If you met with me a few Sunday evenings ago, or you got my email this week, or you followed my social media posts, then you know that we have made a decision to sell the entire church campus. When I met with you a few Sundays ago, we thought that another church was purchasing the entire campus. The name of the church was Covenant Glen United Methodist Church, and we thought that they were so excited about it, and they wanted it and still would like to have it, but the problem was they could not get the financing for it. And so that pretty well fell through. When I began to break the news that we were selling the entire church campus, I got a lot of messages and emails, and people were pretty shocked. Actually, some people were in disbelief that we were doing this. It had kind of come down to a point that a congregation this size could not maintain a campus this size. But I think because I've been here in this spot, we've been here in this spot together, let me say it that way, for more than 30 years, everybody tends to associate me with this church and this address and this particular property, as well as many of you. We've been here a long, long, long time. But honestly, if I look back, I can see that it has been a slow transition taking place over time, the last few years. I think the Father was trying to convince me of something, but at times I'm hard-headed and I don't catch it. I think it's been the last several years that God was trying to show me something, but I'm at times a slow learner. But He has convinced me, and I get it. I finally get it. I think what He was trying to tell me is that a traditional church model and the message that we teach They do not mix. A traditional church model and what we do, they are oil and water. You know, he's got new wine today. He's pouring out new wine all over the earth. And anytime you put new wine into an old wineskin, you have a problem. So when he pours out new wine, he's looking for a new wineskin. Now what I see going on, you know, and I'm very involved with a lot of people, a lot of places, and a lot of things, and I hear from a lot of different parts of the world. And what I see going on all over the world is that God is very discreetly dismantling religion. Sometimes it's not so discreetly. It's a suddenly. He's dismantling religion, and all of the whistles and all of the bells that have been attached to the church and to religion that have been added to try to make it an appealing institution. And churches have become very competitive, all looking for their market share. And God has had it. It's a new day in Zion, body of Christ. I think it says it well in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 27. I want to read that out of the Message. Here's what I see that is going on, and I get it, and God is doing a new thing. And when He does a new thing, He looks for a new vehicle to carry the new thing in. It says in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 27 out of the Message, the phrase "one last shaking" means a thorough house cleaning, getting rid of all the historical and religious junk, watch, so that the unshakable essentials stand clear and uncluttered. I think what God is doing, He's taking us back to simplicity. The church is a pretty complex business today. It has become in many circles, a very big business. And I think what God is doing, He's shaking it. He's shaking the message. He's shaking our priorities. He's shaking what we should be accomplishing, and He's bringing us back to a pretty simple organization. All right, back to the church. We weren't able to sell it to the church. We had two other groups that were really interested in it. One wanted to come in and demolish the property and put up mid-rise condominiums. The other one that was very interested in the property was an investor from Mexico, and he wanted to come in and make this a retail strip center again. So after the deal with the church fell through, we went back to the investor from Mexico, and he's a strictly cash buyer. I won't say a whole lot about him, but he lives back in the hills of Mexico in a big compound. He has a militia that watch the compound, and he pays cash. So he said financing is no problem. His lawyer was here with the inspector on Friday, and I met his lawyer, and he told me he would be flying to Switzerland to get some money. He actually did. I'm not telling tales out of school. And I just nodded. So if things go as planned, there's still some inspections and things to do, but I don't see any obstacle. We plan to close the sale on the building October the 30th. That's the date that has been set. Now, part of the sale agreement was that we lease back for a time the sanctuary and the foyer. So that's part of the sales agreement, so we agreed to do that. So listen to me very closely. On November the 5th, which will be the first Sunday after we close, all you have to do is drive your car into the parking lot, come through the doors. I will be here. Pastor Dennis will be here. The elders will be here. The band will be here. And we will have church. Okay? But we will not have the whole campus. The only thing we have is the sanctuary and the foyer. So our children's church will move to where Kingdom Kids is, and we will have some space in there that we can work with that. How long we will be here, I don't know. I don't know. I do know this, and I'll just tell you, I'll just be as transparent as I can. We're paying, this sanctuary and foyer are 10,000 square feet. And we are paying $1 a foot per month for the sanctuary and the foyer, which is kind of a normal retail space rental. But normally you also pay what's called a CAM, common area maintenance, which is taxes, insurance, and upkeep. We're not paying that. We're just paying the $1 a foot. But still, that's $10,000 a month to use the sanctuary and the foyer 4 times for 2 or 3 hours a week. So for me personally, that seems like an awful lot of money to spend. So how long we're going to be here, I don't know. I know there's a mega church that would like to use this as a auxiliary campus. So I might talk to them about subletting. I don't know. But all I can tell you is on November the 5th, we will have church and it will be here. So where's all this change taking us? Where is this change moving us? Well, I feel a little bit like Abraham when he asked God, God, you told me to leave. I want to know where we're going. And God said, I'll tell you when you get there. I do have a sense of a couple things where I'm headed, where I believe we're headed as a church. I honestly believe that the future of the church, and I'm talking about the church at large, that the future of the church, which then becomes the future that we also have, is much more digital and online than what we've ever imagined. That's going to be where I have a lot of emphasis, is those people, you guys that are watching online, you've just kind of had a free lunch all these days, months, and watched. I haven't really pursued you. We haven't done anything to promote it. We haven't done anything to add more viewers. We've just thrown it out there, and whoever watches off social media, whatever, hears about it. And honestly, we have a lot more people that watch online and watch the YouTube during the week than we ever have coming to church on Sunday. I think, online is becoming the prevalent thing everywhere. If you would have told me 5 or 10 years ago that I would be buying all of my shirts and vitamins online, I would say you're crazy. I go to the mall. Are you like me? You do most of your shopping online now? You know what the kickback on that is? There are big malls all over the country that are closing. Big structures are shutting down because everything has gone online. Out my way of town, West Oaks Mall used to be a big thriving mall, had several big stores in there, like Foley's and Dillard's. The whole thing is just about shut down now. When I moved to Houston, Sharpstown was like the mall. If you wanted to go to the mall, you went to Sharpstown. Now if you go to Sharpstown, it's all tattoo parlors and, crazy kind of things. You don't even want to go to Sharpstown. People shop and buy online. And we're going to go after the online people. I'm going to tell you why in just a couple of minutes. But in addition to online, I also see a core of people that see that world out there and know that there's a great big world out there that we need to reach with the good news. And I think we're probably going to have an expanding core of people that come and meet wherever we meet, who see themselves like missionaries. I want you to see yourself like a missionary that's going to carry through the internet the good news that you have learned to appreciate to every corner of the earth. You know what? We need to share with everybody what we know. Jesus said this. Before I get to what Jesus said, one of the books I've been reading lately is a book called Christianity After Religion. It's the end of church and the birth of a new spiritual awakening. I can't remember how I got the book. It might have popped up on Amazon. Like, Amazon's another case. I mean, look at Amazon. Everything is done online through Amazon. Amazon gets very good at marketing. If you buy a book or something, then they show you a bunch of other suggestions. This might have been one of the suggestions, but it grabbed me. So I already had the message done and everything, so I really couldn't weave this in. But I was reading this Saturday morning. I was sitting out on the back patio, drinking some coffee, and I was reading this. And this paragraph really struck me in his book, Christianity After Religion. And the author is Diana Butler Bass. I never heard of the lady, but she wrote a great book. She said this. She said, the new global Great Awakening is not contained in the stage of the local congregational church, in small groups, at camp meetings or tents, or at Pentecostal tabernacles. This awakening is being performed in the networked world, where the border between sacred and secular has eroded, and where the love of God and neighbor and the new vision of belonging, behaving, and believing is being staged far beyond conventional religious communities. Although churches seem the most natural space to perform spiritual awakening, the disconcerting reality is that many people in Western society see churches more as museums of religion than sacred stages that dramatize the movement of God's Spirit. That's pretty heavy. Then across the page, I underlined this. She said, if you don't know what's going on, it's very difficult to take part. Amen. I think you people pretty well know what's going on. Jesus said this. Jesus said just before he left in Matthew chapter 28. Look at this. In Matthew chapter 28, his parting words. Matthew chapter 28, let me start with verse 18. Jesus came and spoke to them and said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. He said, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the world. For the first time in history, listen to me, for the first time in history, this can be done pretty much continually online. This taking the gospel to all the nations. You see those flags up there? We haven't updated it in a couple of years. They did this one year at Pastor Appreciation, and we should have a lot more flags up. Those flags show every nation that watch this service on live stream. I never thought we would be taking the gospel into every nation this easily. Online is very effective. It goes wherever the internet is. And it's very inexpensive compared to sending a missionary and paying a salary 24/7. This is the way to get the gospel out, folks. This is the way to minister to the nations. And never leave our city. We can go to Nigeria. We can go to Australia. We can go to England. We can go to any nation out of this place. We need to reach the United States. I am convinced, if you sat where I sat every week, I am convinced most people have never heard the gospel. They've heard a lot of church messages. They've heard a lot of doctrine. They have heard a lot of do's and don'ts. But most people have never heard the gospel. And as a result of that, people have not rejected Jesus. All of this stone throwing at people that have rejected Jesus, that the church community does. Look, they've not rejected Jesus. They have rejected some bogus message from another Jesus and another gospel presenting God in such a horrendous light. I don't believe in that God either. Most of us don't believe that gospel either. They've not rejected Jesus. They've rejected the message and the messenger of another gospel that's bringing another Jesus to the table, and it's very unpalatable. It doesn't resonate in the majority of people unless somehow they have seen the love of God and the goodness of God like you have. Most want nothing to do with it. Now, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 14, He said, this gospel of the kingdom, this good news, will be preached in all the world as a witness. In other words, as a demonstration. It will be demonstrated. The grace of God, the goodness of God, the mercy of God, the love of God needs to be demonstrated to all the nations. And it has not been. But it will be. What they've heard has not been good news. Most cities have no gospel, good news preaching churches. I hear from cities every week without exception. I didn't say anything to you about it, but I had 2 churches a couple weeks ago. You remember 3 weeks ago, I did two teachings on 8 reasons why we teach the grace message. I had some pastors. I have some pastors watch it online. One is Larry Silverman in Inverness, Florida. The other is Tom Shannon in Port Huron. They contacted me, independent of one another, and they said, do you mind if we take the video and show that as the sermon in our Sunday morning service? Did I tell you that? And I said, I'm honored that you do that. Listen, this is the power of the internet. So they take the message, and I said, I'm very anxious to know how your people received a video message on Sunday morning. So they both got back to me and said they loved it. They absolutely loved the video. It was just what we needed at the time. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, okay, I was a special speaker without leaving the church. Where's the love offering? We're missing something here. You know, we have groups of people this morning that are meeting in homes that are watching this service. They have breakfast together, then this is their church. Got people in different states that do that. So I began to think, I can't get churches and grace churches in every city. I don't know if there's one in Montgomery, Alabama, Tallahassee, Florida, Atlanta. I don't know. There is no network that can point to it. So I've come to the conclusion that we need to take the church to them. We need to take the church to them. And we will begin to find some ways to do that. So what I'm saying to you this morning is this. Here's what I want to do. I want to build a worldwide digital community. That's what I want to do. I mean something not that you just tune in on Sunday morning and watch. I mean something that you actually join, you support, you're part of, you're connected to. People become very connected to one another on social media if you don't know that. Those of you that are very much into social media, I bet you're like me. I have people that I have never met personally, but I've interacted with them so much, I know them. I consider them a friend. I've never met them personally. Last Sunday morning, I didn't know it till the end of the service. There was a lady that flew from Chicago, Illinois to Houston, Texas to be in our service. After the service, she came down and introduced herself. She had written a daily devotional, Total Grace. It is awesome. I've been reading it this week. It is awesome. I didn't know she was here. She said, I follow you faithfully on YouTube. I watch the church services online. She said, it's been a breath of fresh air in Chicago. We really don't have anything. It's Chicago. I'm talking about building something that we would join, we support, we feel part of, that we're connected with. Right now, there has been generic growth. There will be, when this service ends, there will be discussion groups that discuss what we talked about this morning. I'm seeing small groups, communities develop. Church, listen to me. We might be selling the property, but we have an opportunity to become part of something bigger than we are. Amen. I've been talking to Steve McVeigh. Most of you know Steve McVeigh. Steve and I have the same heart about this. And Steve, you're probably watching this morning because you announced it at your morning coffee what we were going to be doing. We got the same heart about this. We have talked about this worldwide digital community for hours. on how to put it together, what it should look like, how we can promote, who would come into it, the whole thing. Listen, I have the same feeling in my spirit about this as I did about Global Grace Seminary 5 years ago, when I looked around in the Grace community and I saw there was no place where anybody could ever get any education. There was no place where you could go and learn what God is saying, what God is doing. I ran into Cecil Cockerham. Cecil had an online school. I wanted him to put a grace course in. He wouldn't do it. His board wouldn't let him. So I said, good, we'll make our own. So it took us a couple of years to do it. Listen, Global Grace Seminary is very unique. It's all online. You work at your pay. I'm not putting a plug in for it. But what I do want to tell you is it has been a smashing hit. We have students from 20 nations. I can't believe it. Amen. Students from 20 nations. When I learned all this, I would get a tape here, a book there. I'd hear this, I'd hear that. There is a place you can go. You can get an accredited degree in 3 different areas. You can get a master's degree. We're working on a Doctor of Ministry program. You can go and you can receive an education. I felt the same urgency. There's nothing like it anywhere that I know of. There is no grace-oriented seminary that you can go to and get the education you can at Global Grace. I feel the same way about this. This is going to become a worldwide digital community of which you are the driving force. You are the missionaries. You are the ones with the vision. You're going to help me carry this out, I hope. I hope. We're going to do this together. Look, we've said for years, the church is not the building. So don't get upset if we're not in the building. Come on, we are the church. So what is the structure going to look like? How's the structure? I see a simple, no programs church. We're going to learn to travel light, folks. Yes, something for children. We'll probably have, small children. I realize you don't want to wrestle your 3-year-old 2 out of 3 falls during the church service. But beyond that, I don't see men's ministry, women's ministry, singles ministry, couples ministry, home. I don't see all of that. Let me just say a word about teenagers. I've changed my thinking some on that. I think teenagers need to be a part of the community because they're going to be the leaders tomorrow. Let me say it to you like this. If I had a teenager, I would want them part of the community. I'd want them singing. I'd want them ushering, running a camera. They need to be part of. Now, I'm not trying to boast here, but I want to tell you the honest truth. I will teach your teens better than any youth pastor. They will learn the gospel. They will learn the scriptures. I know they need activities. I know that. They need social things. When the glacier moved off of Michigan, I was in a youth group. And I love that youth group. Had a lot of social activity in that youth group. If you catch my drift. It was a great youth group. I really did. Had a lot of good friends. But you know what? Kids' minds today are sharp. They need to be trained in the gospel. It breaks my heart. We started years ago, and I was in full support of the youth having their own service, full service. But I've noticed over the years there comes a disconnect when they graduate from high school. They've not been part of the church. And so when kids leave and they go off to college, I never see them again. It's very rare. Aloysius' daughters, they come. But most of our kids, they don't stay in church. And there's something wrong with that. They need activity. I hope we get a couple or something that can plan activities and outings and go with them. But they need to be trained in the gospel. And I think I can do a good job in training your kids. All right? So we're looking at an outreach that's going to be really wide. Our message is going to be wide. What we have to say is not for most of the evangelical community that is very stuck in their church and have no eyes to see and no ears to hear. It does not appeal to them. I am after what Steve McVeigh has coined the nuns and the duns. All right? The nuns are those that have no church. They might be what I call pre-believers. He stole that term from me, so I'll steal the nuns and duns from him. The nuns have no church. They might be unbelievers. There might be no church in their community. They are what we call the nuns. They are not involved in church at all. And then there are the duns. The duns are those that are done with church. They've been hurt. They've been disillusioned. They've been kicked out sometimes because their theology doesn't line up with the church. But the bottom line is they are not going back to a brick and mortar building. They're not going to do it. And that number of nuns and duns is growing rapidly. It's growing rapidly. That's the people that I want to reach. That's the people that will pull up a computer and turn it on and watch what you're doing. And what I would like to have on that live stream presentation is a good presentation that is as good as setting here, which means we're going to need better cameras, better sound, better everything to make it a presentation, a good teaching, a good time together. So what I'm wanting you this morning, and this is, didn't want to say enough to confuse everybody. I want you to understand the direction, what we're doing. We'll be together, but we're going to reach out wide and broad. I want you to feel the excitement. I want you to feel the sense of destiny that I feel. There's nothing to feel sad about, nothing to be depressed about, nothing to be defeated or feel negative about. It's not a big emotional experience for me. This is a building. It's steel and concrete. It's a building. I don't feel emotional about it. There's a new day dawning, and those that feel pulled into this or pulled toward it are going to be a special breed of people. If this is you, the people that really get involved in it say, okay, look, I'm going to give myself to something bigger than me. There's a lot of people out there that need to know the message. I'm a missionary. I'll support. I'll contribute. I'll participate. Let's do what we can do to put the message in as many places as we can put it. It's going to be a special breed of people. You know why? It's going to be people that don't need the approval of others. Because as this message gets out, you're going to have to come out of the closet and stand for where you are. It's going to be people that can go it alone. It's going to be people that like change. It's going to be people that can deal with challenges on the fly, that can take risks. It's going to be a breed of people that can stick to it. They're not afraid to fail. Going to be people that are very innovative, not in need of the way it's always been done. Extremely innovative. These people that come together to get this gospel to all the world through a worldwide digital community are going to be people that are pioneers. They're explorers. They're way clearers for other people. Other people will follow the path that you blaze. They're going to be people that don't mind sacrifice. People that can keep their eye on the ball. People that don't quit until, like Paul, they finish the race. All right, hear me really plain and clear this morning. We are not shutting down. We're not dissolving. I've heard that I don't know how many times. I heard the church is dissolving. No, the church is not closing the doors. I'm not quitting. We're shifting gears. It may look different. A year from now, it may not look like it does this morning. But I'm going to tell you something. I'm just warming up. I'm just getting heated up for the game. I, 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 I am not ready to do nothing. That is not moi. We're stoking it up, folks. I want one day, I want you and your kids and your grandkids to join me in looking back and say, I was part of that. I was there during that whole thing. I remember how it all transpired. It wasn't easy, but I'll tell you what, we made it through. I was part of that. Let me just say in conclusion, listen. He's bringing us out to take us in. The world is packed with people that need to hear about Jesus. I mean the Jesus that you heard about. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to go into all the world with this base right here, with you. And we're going to tell them the good news. Now that may not fit for all of you. Maybe you're just a person, you know, I got to go to a church building. I like that I like the way it's always been. You know what? Then that's probably not for you. So there's two things. You have two options. You can be either part of what is going to happen, or you can just hide in the bushes and watch it happen. Now next week, what I want to do next week is answer the why of all of this. Why are we going to do this? What do we want the world to know? What is it that we want to convey? What is it we're going to be putting out there? What am I going to be part of that goes out from this place to the four corners of the world? How can I get involved with it? You see, the what and the how are good, but really what drives the bus is the why. Why we do what we do. It's what gives the sizzle to the steak. It's what brings the fruit of change. So I want to talk to you about what it is and how it is and why we're going to do what we're going to do. I hope this morning I've been able to bring a little bit of clarification, let you know where we're at, all that I know. If you have any questions after church, you can ask me any question you want. The elders are here. You can ask them any question you want. All I can tell you is I'm excited about it. I think it's an exciting time coming, and I want you to be part of it. In Jesus' name, amen?